It is this fear that the people within the party, within the primary system, will have about voting for a woman, because every time we voted for a woman, we've lost so far. And I think that that's a natural fear because we just want to win. So there's a lot of people that are like, you know what? Like, let's go find the safest white boy we can find. I mean, I'm just saying.
Those are the callers that we're hearing. We're hearing people.
No, for real.
A white man's got to do it. We're getting those callers.
For real. And to be clear, when we talk about them, I can tell you that there is one specific candidate. I had a donor on the phones with me telling me that all the donors are lining up behind that candidate. So I can tell, and I can tell you it's not a black person nor woman, okay? So like it is, they have, quote unquote, they have chosen, and when I say they, it's the same donors that most likely had their opinions about Joe Biden and move. So like that would be the they that I would talk about. Here's what I want people to understand is I do absolutely agree with Malcolm when he talks about not ceding your power. At the end of the day, don't give up your power. People fail to recognize how unique Trump is. They continue to say, well, we lost. Well, they both lost to Trump. Trump, who is a misogynist. Trump, who is going to ramp up the misogynist in the first place, because that's what he does. He is disrespectful. Like right now, he still doesn't know how to deal with me, because if you punch me, I'm punching back, okay? So like, here's the deal. Here's the deal. Now, I know he think he running again. But that ain't happening. I don't care what all is going on in this country. And I don't care how many things we won't say we are absolutely going to do. I am telling y'all with all confidence, he is not running for a third term. That is not a thing.
It wasn't a press conference. There were no flags waving behind her, no crowd chanting a slogan. Just Jasmine Crockett seated under soft lighting, the Sirius XM studio cool and controlled, with a mic between her and the truth. And then she said it, without a stutter, without looking around for approval. They're already lining up behind the safest white boy. It wasn't the volume of her voice that made the statement cut. It was the precision, the kind of sentence that doesn't just challenge assumptions, it slices them open. The air in the room shifted. Reese Colbert raised an eyebrow. Malcolm Kenyatta shifted forward slightly in his seat. No one interrupted, because everyone knew that in that moment, Crockett wasn't speculating. She was exposing. She wasn't naming names, but her words painted a silhouette in high definition. She wasn't attacking her party. She was warning it. This wasn't about bitterness. It was a diagnosis. Crockett saw the early signs of a sickness within the donor class, a retreat to comfort, to predictability, to the past, and she called it what it was, a rush to find the safest vessel to protect their interests. And that vessel, unsurprisingly, looked like every candidate that had ever been chosen before. The room wasn't a courtroom, but it had the energy of one, carpeted silence, a sense that something was about to be put on record that couldn't be unsaid. The Sirius XM town hall wasn't supposed to be explosive, just a conversation, a panel. Jasmine Crockett, seated between DNC Vice Chair Malcolm Kenyatta and hosts Clay Kane and Reese Colbert, had no script. No one did. Just chairs, microphones, and the hum of real-time truth. Outside the studio glass, producers watched like air traffic controllers. Inside, the voices were calm, the rhythm deliberate. But when Crockett leaned forward, eyes sharp, jaw set, something changed. She wasn't just adding her voice to a discussion. She was cracking it wide open. What started as a strategic chat about the 2028 Democratic field suddenly tilted into something else entirely. "I'm talking about one specific candidate," she said, her tone level, her face unreadable. It wasn't the heat of her statement that made the moment burn. It was its calm inevitability, like a judge reading a verdict. And the way her co-panelists paused said everything. This wasn't gossip. This was exposure. Beneath the polished surface of party politics, a shape was beginning to form, and Crockett had just outlined its edges in ink. There's a kind of fear that doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't show up in headlines, but in handshakes behind closed doors, in donor meetings held in sunlit conference rooms far from the camera's gaze. And Jasmine Crockett knew that fear intimately. She could see it in the way Democratic money moved, not boldly toward change, but cautiously toward control. "They're scared," she said, "not of losing to Republicans, not even of Trump's shadow, but of women, of black women, of power they couldn't predict." And in that Sirius XM studio, she didn't have to shout it. The words hung there, heavy, familiar to anyone who'd been told to wait their turn, while watching men skip the line entirely. Crockett named the ghost in the room, the institutional hesitation cloaked as strategy. Donors, those faceless shapers of viability, weren't asking who inspired voters. They were asking who scared them least, and history told them it wasn't women. You could almost hear the replays in their heads, election cycles where bold female leadership was blamed for losses, not credited for courage. They wanted safe, predictable, a man, a white man, and that's what they were banking on. But Jasmine wasn't banking. She was betting on something braver. If you listen closely, power doesn't speak in shouts. It murmurs behind conference room doors, cloaked in phrases like electability and momentum. Jasmine Crockett had heard those murmurs for years, and on that stage she finally called them what they were: control disguised as caution. The same high-powered donors who'd once doubted Joe Biden were now shaping 2028, before most Americans even knew the race had begun. She didn't need to name them. You could see their fingerprints in the way conversations shifted, in how certain candidates magically rose to the top of serious contender lists, as if by gravity. But it wasn't gravity. It was guidance, moneyed, polished, and terrified of disruption. Crockett knew the playbook: build up a candidate who looks like safety, then claim it's what the people wanted. But the people weren't in the room. Donors were. And what they feared most wasn't the GOP. It was unpredictability. It was a candidate who didn't owe them favors. It was someone who might win on her own terms. As she spoke, her voice was steady, not accusatory, but surgical, a slow unmasking of the machinery behind the message. And for a moment, you could feel the studio air shift. She wasn't theorizing. She was testifying. There's a kind of rot that politics doesn't like to name, because it's not just systemic, it's viral. Jasmine Crockett named it anyway: misogyny. Not in a footnote, not in passing, but front and center where it belonged. Because in the shadow of Donald Trump, the old rules had mutated. He hadn't just normalized disrespect, he'd weaponized it. And in doing so, he didn't just embolden his base. He poisoned the water everyone else was drinking from, too. Crockett didn't flinch when she said it. The disrespect Trump showed women, loudly, proudly, left an imprint on American politics. And Democrats, even as they fought him, had started making quiet concessions to that noise. Women candidates, especially black women, weren't just battling policy. They were battling a cultural aftershock, one that made their ambition feel like a liability to the donor class. You could hear it in the way candidates were described: too polarizing, too emotional, too risky. But what Crockett made clear was this: those weren't critiques. They were warnings, coded in respectability, tailored to gatekeep. And she didn't just see it, she felt it. Not as theory, but as lived experience. That's what gave her voice weight, not anger, but memory, not a speech, a reckoning. The air in the room didn't clear when Jasmine Crockett finished. It condensed. A kind of stillness followed, not silence, but the quiet weight of realization. She wasn't asking for applause. She wasn't even asking for agreement. She was doing what leaders rarely do in polite company, drawing a line. Not against Republicans, not against rivals, but against retreat. Because this wasn't just about 2028. It was about a pattern, one that repeats every cycle like a glitch in the matrix. A pattern where bold voices are sidelined for familiar faces, where electability becomes a euphemism for exclusion. Crockett had seen it too many times to let it slide again. And so, with the soft power of conviction, she said what few would. We can't build a future by retreating into the past. She didn't name herself as the solution. That wasn't the point. The point was to widen the lens, to remind the party that safety isn't strategy, and that leadership doesn't have to come wrapped in the same skin, the same smile, the same story. And for those listening closely, it wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation, not to follow her, but to stop following fear,